In today's Pulse of Exile 2 video, I will show you my Storm Mage build. This Lightning Sorcerer have nice clear, nice solo target damage. I will explain everything, starting from leveling to what skills I use, what support gems I'm using, base of skill tree, what gear and how we can get it, and it will be more than enough for you to clear and game content up to like tier 18 maps. And without further ado, let's jump straight into the beginning of the game in clear file and talk about leveling. This build will focus on Arc spell, but we need to level up to get to this spell. So first spell that we will use and learn is Spark spell. It will create little lightning sparks all over the screen and they will bump into objects and bounce from them, or they will directly hit enemies. The biggest problem for this spell is low damage, but you can basically hold the button and throw as much as you wish. They will stay for a long time and you can move like this in clear areas pretty effortlessly. But it won't take a long time until you start to realize that damage is not enough. And we get very nice combination with another spell that can amplify damage of sparks. It's not other spell than Firewall. You create Firewall and when sparks go through it, they will become lightning and fire sparks at the same time, as you can see, with basically amplified and almost double damage. The best places to use sparks and this combination is kinda tight spaces like caves and dungeons, temples with narrow corridors. You will see how much damage you can deal with this spell in these tight spaces. But it's not always true. So you will find yourself in this place in Mausoleum of Praetor and other tombs in Act 1, and there will be a lot of very special enemies that can counter your sparks pretty easily. Since Spark is projectile spell, this guy will always bump projectiles back at you, and you can kill yourself just by using sparks non-stop against these dudes. So you need to be extra careful and try to attack with sparks from his back. Also, you will unlock new spell at this point of the game that will be called Orb of Storm. It will deal lightning damage to the targets every few seconds, and this attack will chain. So that's kinda the secret how you can inflict a lot more damage to these guys so that's causing you some troubles. Since chain spell is not projectile and won't be turned back on you. Also, when you cast your sparks inside of this radius of the big ball, it will summon even more sparks and also will attack more often. And finally, at level 14 we will unlock Arc spell. Arc is chaining spell and it dealing a lot more damage than sparks, of course, to a single target and chains from him to another target. As I told you, build will be based on this spell because I like how it looks. You know, when you're making Storm Mage, you want this chain lightning. It just looks badass, you know? Not that boring Smurf chunder all over the screen. While advancing through the game, bosses will be harder and harder, so we will unlock new curse, it will be called Conductivity, and it will apply a lot more pressure on bosses, since they will take a lot more damage from our lightning attacks, and that's basically how we will deal with bosses in this mid-game leveling situation. And we will play like this right until we hit level 31, when we unlock Mana Tempest, spell that significantly will raise our lightning damage, so we don't need Flame Wall from this point of the game, and we can just go with Ball, Mana Tempest and start shooting our lightning spells. You need to be careful though, because when you're standing in Mana Tempest for continuous amounts of time or casting lots of spell, it will eat your mana very fast. So remember to step out of the storm every now and then, or when you notice that your mana is starting to drop. If you combine it with Arc spell, it will chain more times. If you combine it with Spark, it will fork when it reaches enemies, so it can hit 2 more targets after hitting 1 target. Now let's quickly look at passive skill tree when you're leveling. Just go into the left branch that gives you spell damage and follow it to the top. Continue your way up top, following the right path that will give you more lightning damage. After reaching transitional nodes, pick Intelligence over here and go to the left and then to the top left. Pick other stats only if you need attributes for support skill gems, but you want to go into this part of the tree with a bunch of intelligence or other stats and get to this elemental damage part. You want to pick every node you see on the screen right now, but starting moving to the left. Your elemental damage will be a lot higher and you will go through this part of the game like a breeze. Technically, that's everything you need for early game, so let's talk about our buffs that will give us ability to survive. Mana Remnants is most important one, because you will find yourself out of mana a lot of time and you can't fight versus enemies without mana, of course. After killing shocked enemies, they will summon these balls, Mana Remnants. You can go over them, pick them up, and you will gain mana. So that's basically how you get almost unlimited mana and defeat all enemies. Now I will get back to passive skill tree for a moment. There's a nice, very powerful Mind over Matter node over here right near our boss. So, if you're feeling that you can't survive some attacks, at this point of the game you actually can pick this node. It will take damage from mana instead of health, which effectively will double your health. It will give you ability to survive massive attacks, but yeah, mana regeneration will be a lot worse. But it can be easily fixed by going a long way to the top right over here and taking sharp left turn to the bottom. Here you will find a lot of good mana regeneration nodes, followed by Ether Flow, which will give insane mana regeneration while we're moving. And you can even follow it with Eldritch Battery to the right side. That will give us mana instead of energy shield. More mana means more mana regeneration, and this will definitely fix all our problems in survivability and mana regeneration. Another buff that I'm using is Cast on Shock. Whenever we shock enemies, a lot of times it will gain charges, and when it's fully charged, it will unleash spells that we're inserting inside of this spell. You can insert any lightning spell you wish, but I inserted additional arc. Yeah, I'm just king of chain lightning. Now let's take a look at important things when you level up further. So this part is really important because it gives you more mana regeneration and more effect of Arcane Surge, which gives you mana regeneration. But you only want this part when you ascend and get your ascendancy points. So first 2 points in Ascendancy should go to this left part. That will basically give you Arcane Surge all the time. Whenever you get opportunity, get this part on the top. That will increase your lightning damage and also will increase your lightning damage based on your intelligence. If you're having problem in shocking enemies, then this bottom left part, which gives you chance of shock, is really good. Also this lightning branch that gives casting speed with lightning spell is really nice and powerful, as well as the right part of it that will give more chain to your chain spells, and the arc is a chain spell. Yeah, it will chain to the more targets. We can increase cast speed later in this part and take all of them after you take these nodes that will give you damage based on your total mana. You can find full passive skill tree that I'm using right now in my Discord, link in the description, but basically I spec'd into casting speed and critical spell chance. It works insanely good and really fun. But to make everything work, we need correct supportive skill gems in our skills, of course. So Flame Wall, when you're leveling up, will use Spell Echo. I really like this spell. It will create 2 flame walls, cover more area. This means more sparks will be flamed up and you will deal more damage. Very nice when you're leveling. Now let's talk about this Spark spell. It creates the sparks, and I like to use it not as the main spell, but as supportive spell that will give me some crowd control, since when enemies trying to attack me, you know, sometimes it's really hard and they actually can engage and deal damage, eat our mana with this build, and we're out of mana, out of health, basically we are done. So, to make the spell supportive, I'm using Electrocute. Instead of inflicting shock, this will inflict Electrocute on enemies. They will be kinda frozen for 5 straight seconds. It's insane crowd control, insane boss stopper. Basically, you will stop them, you will stun them, and it's really nice and useful, especially when we're using Arc as the main damaging spell. So since Spark is kinda our supportive spell, I'm using Controlled Destruction on it. It will deal more damage with hits, but won't deal critical hits. Again, I'm doing critical hit build, but Spark is my supportive spell, so we don't need these critical hits on this spell. The next supportive gem I'm using is Pierce, and projectile from supportive skills will pierce enemies. This means they can go farther, attack more enemies, and if you cast it in Eye of the Storm, they will also fork sometime, so it's pretty like fun stuff to electrocute all enemies you see. But even using outside of Eye of the Storm, I like to use fork on it, so it can fork, it can pierce, therefore it can electrocute more enemies on the screen if needed. And the damage we are looking for in this spell to clear tier 18 maps, basically the full content. You can clear all content with just 12k DPS on the tooltip of this spell, so you don't need a lot. Honestly, when you're reaching like in-game content, you need to think more about survival than clearing. You will clear stuff a lot. Then you will get currency, get like better gear, and your spark will even deal like 50k DPS even with this build that not focusing on spark. But we are focusing on arc spells that shooting chain lightnings, and they can deal up to 700 damage on the first hit. That's pretty crazy and a lot actually. So we can actually buff this spell a lot with a bunch of cool like damage amplifiers. What I found that you don't need a lot more damage, and I'm using Lightning Mastery to get +1 level to supported skill. It will increase mana usage a little bit, but also will increase damage a lot. At the same time, I'm using Arcane Tempo to have more casting speed with this spell. And since the spell is a hit spell, I'm using considered casting. I'm lowering my casting speed and dealing 40% more damage with spell hits. The last but not least is Inspiration. It will lower the cost of the skill. So, main idea is that I got really high level lightning spell, chain lightning, arc, and I'm not even like buffing damage a lot, but it costs me almost nothing to cast, so I can cast it almost every time and keep my mana pool as my health pool at the same time. The damage right now is 46k, actually it's around 50 after I respect my passive skill tree. And again, that's more than enough to defeat bosses, enemies, but yeah, you won't one-shot bosses with 46k DPS, but still, it's pretty crazy, since we will crit a lot with a lot more critical damage, and while DPS is like 46k, actually we can hit for like 200, 300 damage with crits, a lot. And amplified by other skills, this skill basically carry me through the campaign, through endgame, and pretty cool and fun to use. The next skill is Orb of Storms. Again, I'm using it to buff my other skills, to deal some stuff, and I use Persistence, so it will have more duration, it will stay for longer. You don't need to cast it a lot more. Conduction, to have more chances to shock enemies, and Lightning Penetration, that will penetrate lightning resistance of enemies, basically to deal a little bit more damage with the skill, pretty like fun stuff to buff our damage if needed. Conductivity, that will apply Curse to lower lightning resistance of enemies. It's pretty straightforward, we're using Heightened Curse to increase effect of supported curses, basically lowering resistance even more, with a magnified effect to have more area of effect, so it's harder for us to miss, especially groups of enemies. And yeah, we can use it not only on bosses, we can use it on enemies who is in groups and got lightning resistance, for example, very useful stuff. And last but not least, Focused Curse, that will make this curse zone erupt a lot faster. Again, monsters, especially in the maps, is a lot faster than you face in the campaign, and it's harder to hit them with the curse. Now it's a lot easier because it will erupt a lot faster. Then of course Mana Tempest, and on Mana Tempest I got Arcane Surge right now that will give me Arcane Surge after I spend a lot mana on this spell. And yeah, it's kinda useless after you get your Ascendancy, so you can definitely drop it. Also I got Mobility, but basically it doesn't need like a lot of supportive gems to be useful. While you're leveling, cast on Shock. I used it with Arc Spell, Lightning Exposure to inflict a Lightning Exposure when it triggers, and Impetus to gain more energy. And Archmage, I got nothing inside, you can suggest me in the comments what can we drop into this spell, but it works just nice. Probably best combination will be to get like +1 level into Archmage, and then more damage into our Arc Spell, of course. But again, I'm feeling nice right now, and I'm waiting until I hit the wall with the build, then we will fix it if needed. Mana Remnants, just with clarity, I don't have a lot of spirit with this build, so more mana regeneration is what we need. And that's basically it, that's every support gem we're using right now in this build, and it's time to talk about our combination, how we face bosses. You definitely can't just run around, hit your arc spell and defeat bosses like that, but here is the full way and full strategy in boss fights. You want to cast Conductivity to lower lightning resistance first, and then stand in some like safe place, cast Eye of the Storm, maybe even Orb of Storm, and then cast Sparks until enemy is paralyzed and standing still doing nothing. Then you do full combination and finish him with Arc Spell like you've seen on the screen right now. After reaching level 70 and tier 8 maps, I decided to spend some exiles on gear. Starting with body armor that I want to use as soon as possible, so let's put maximum level 74 and no requirements for strength and dexterity. I want intelligence, high energy shield armor. That's basically the options we have, and I'm looking to find exactly this armor, cat raiment, that got inflict mana regeneration, and I'm looking for 2 resistances at this armor as well as more health or more mana. So pretty good option for just 4 Exile orbs. Then I'm looking for wand with mana, spell damage, lightning damage and stuff like that. It shows me a lot of high level wands that I will need to level up a lot to use, so I'm definitely limiting it to like level 72. More lightning damage, more mana and more level 2 lightning spells. And of course it's too good to be true for 1 Exiled Orb, since a lot of players playing Spark Mages. For just 6 Exiled Orbs I got this wand, and it's pretty good. I want to use focus on my offhand with more casting speed, spell damage and also with some resistances. But also there is nice stat level of all spell skills. And for 10 Exiled Orbs I got this focus with more energy shield, lightning damage. More mana means more damage with my build, casting speed, intelligence means more damage with my build, and fire resistance. Helmet with critical hit chance, some resistances, energy shield. Pretty nice boots with high movement speed and nice amount of resistances. I finished with gloves, rings and amulets, and basically that's my character sheet before I got new items. And that's the stats I used to map until like tier 8 maps. After getting all the resistances kept, it's more than enough to finally go and finish all content. That's how the character looks on tier 18 maps. We go in and one-shotting or two-shotting most of the enemies. One shots is crits of course, two shots is basic hits, and yeah, that's basically proves that you don't need a lot of like DPS, and 40k is more than enough to finish all content. We are pretty tanky to deal with these guys, but of course we need to get more tankiness and some extra items to become insanely overpowered later on. If you enjoyed the build, make sure to leave a comment, drop a like button, and I will post updates on this build. So, other cool videos on the screen right now, see you there.